The explosion ripped through the underground lab, the force of the blast slamming into me like a sledgehammer. I felt the searing heat wash over my skin as I was thrown back, my body ragdolling through the air before crashing to the ground in a heap of twisted limbs and shattered concrete. For a moment, I lay there stunned, my ears ringing and my vision blurred. Every inch of my body screamed in agony, and I could taste the coppery tang of blood in my mouth. But I wasn't dead. Not yet. Slowly, painfully, I dragged myself to my feet, ignoring the white-hot shards of pain that lanced through my battered frame with every movement. The lab was in ruins, the once sterile chambers now a hellish landscape of twisted metal, shattered glass, and flickering flames. And there, in the center of the destruction, lay the remains of the Chimera Strain Queen, a massive, smoldering husk of charred flesh. The sight of it filled me with a grim sense of satisfaction, even as the acrid stench of burnt tissue seared my nostrils. But I couldn't afford to linger. The explosion was sure to attract attention, and I knew that the remaining members of the Chimera Strain Conspiracy would stop at nothing to hunt me down and silence me forever. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I limped my way out of the ruined lab, navigating through the debris-strewn corridors and shattered doorways. Every step was a new agony, my injuries screaming in protest, but I pushed onwards, fueled by sheer willpower and the knowledge that I couldn't rest until the job was done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I emerged from the facility's emergency exit, stumbling out into the cool night air. The stars twinkled overhead, serene and indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded below. I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath, my lungs burning with each ragged gasp. But even as I stood there, I could feel the weight of my injuries taking their toll, my body growing heavy and sluggish as the adrenaline began to fade. I knew I needed to find somewhere safe to regroup and plan my next move. The conspiracy might have been dealt a crippling blow, but I had no illusions that they were finished. They would come for me, with everything they had, and I needed to be ready. Summoning the last of my strength, I set off into the night, my mind already racing with the challenges that lay ahead. I was hurt, exhausted, and alone, but I was alive. And as long as I drew breath, I would continue to fight, to hunt, to do whatever it took to put an end to the nightmare of the Chimera Strain once and for all. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as I approached the compound, my eyes narrowing as I surveyed the heavily fortified stronghold before me. It had taken weeks of careful planning and reconnaissance to track down this final bastion of the Chimera Strain Conspiracy. But now, at last, I had reached my destination. The last remaining leaders of the conspiracy were holed up within these walls, no doubt plotting their next move even as they cowered in fear of the reckoning that awaited them. I checked my gear one final time, my fingers running over the reassuring weight of my weapons and equipment. I had armed myself to the teeth for this final confrontation, carrying an arsenal of firearms, explosives, and specialized tools designed to neutralize any chimeric monstrosities that might still lurk within the compound. With a deep breath, I began my infiltration, slipping through the shadows and exploiting the tiniest gaps in the compound's defenses. I moved like a ghost, my footsteps silent and my movements precise, guided by years of training and an unwavering focus on my mission. As I penetrated deeper into the facility, I encountered resistance, guards and security systems that sought to bar my path and raise the alarm. But I was ready for them, dispatching each obstacle with ruthless efficiency and cold precision. In a matter of minutes, the outer defenses had fallen, and I found myself moving through the heart of the compound, a labyrinth of sterile corridors and high-tech laboratories. The air was thick with the stench of chemicals and the hum of machinery, a chilling reminder of the twisted experiments that had given birth to the Chimera strain. And then, in a central chamber that pulsed with an eerie green light, I found them. The last surviving leaders of the conspiracy huddled around a bank of computer screens and whispering frantically among themselves. At the center of the group stood a figure I recognized instantly, Dr. Emil Vestergaard, the brilliant but twisted scientist who had been Dr. Blackwood's secret collaborator, and the true mastermind behind the Chimera Strain project. Vestergaard looked up as I entered, his eyes widening in shock and fear as he recognized me. "You," he hissed, his voice trembling with both rage and terror. "You should be dead!" I smiled grimly, raising my weapon and taking aim at his head. "I'm hard to kill," I growled, my finger tightening on the trigger. "But you? Not so much." What followed was a blur of violence and chaos. A desperate struggle as Vestergaard's remaining loyalists threw themselves at me in a frantic attempt to protect their leader. They fell, one by one, their bodies crumpling to the floor in broken heaps. And then, at last, I stood face to face with Vestergaard himself, the man whose twisted ambitions had unleashed such horror upon the world. He stared at me with a mixture of hatred and despair, his once brilliant mind unraveling before my eyes. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice trembling with madness. "You think you can stop what I've set in motion? The Chimera Strain is just the beginning, a glimpse of the glorious future that awaits us all." I didn't bother to argue with him. I simply raised my gun and fired, watching with grim satisfaction as the bullet punched through his forehead and silenced his ranting forever. As Vestergaard's lifeless body slumped to the ground, I turned my attention to the computer banks, my eyes scanning the screens and displays for any hint of the Chimera Strain research. I couldn't risk any trace of this nightmare surviving, ready to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting world once again. With a few deft keystrokes, I initiated the compound's self-destruct sequence, watching as the countdown began to tick away on the screens before me. I had only minutes to escape before the entire facility was reduced to rubble, erasing the last vestiges of the Chimera Strain from existence. As I raced through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris and leaping over gaping chasms, I felt a sense of grim triumph welling up within me. It had been a long, brutal road to get to this point, a road paved with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But at last, the nightmare was over. The Chimera Strain had been eradicated, and the world could rest easy once more. But even as I burst out into the open air, the compound exploding behind me in a thunderous blast of fire and shattered concrete, I knew that my work was far from finished. There would always be more monsters lurking in the shadows, more nightmares waiting to be born. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon as I pulled my battered truck into the parking lot of a lonely diner on the outskirts of town. The events of the past few weeks felt like a distant nightmare, a blur of violence and horror that had left me both physically and emotionally drained. But it was over now. The Chimera Strain Conspiracy had been dismantled, its leaders dead and its monstrous creations wiped from the face of the earth. The world would never know how close it had come to a catastrophe beyond imagining. And that was just the way I liked it. I slid into a booth by the window, my body aching with the accumulated injuries of countless battles. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a weary smile, brought me a cup of coffee without even being asked. She could tell I needed it. As I sipped the steaming liquid, I found my thoughts drifting back over the long and painful journey that had brought me to this moment. I thought of all the lives that had been lost, all the sacrifices that had been made in the name of stopping the Chimera Strain. I thought of Dr. Blackwood and his mad vision, of Colonel Graves and his ruthless ambition, of all the nameless horrors I had faced in those hellish underground labs. But most of all, I thought of the future. I knew that my work as a monster hunter was far from over, that there would always be new threats emerging from the shadows, new nightmares waiting to be born. The Chimera Strain had been just one manifestation of the darkness that lurked at the edges of our world, a darkness that would never truly be vanquished. And yet, as I sat there in that lonely diner, watching the sun rise over the distant hills, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced the abyss and emerged on the other side, scarred and weary but unbroken. I had stared into the face of true horror and refused to blink, refused to back down. I knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, that there would be more monsters to hunt and more battles to fight. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As I finished my coffee and paid my bill, I felt a renewed sense of purpose flowing through me. The world needed people like me, now more than ever. People who were willing to stand against the darkness, to fight for the light even when all hope seemed lost. I stepped out into the morning sun, feeling its warmth on my face and the weight of my destiny settling over me like a mantle. There would be more scars to bear, more sacrifices to make, but I would bear them gladly, knowing that each one was a testament to the lives I had saved and the horrors I had averted. The hunt was far from over. But as long as I drew breath, as long as there were monsters to be slain and innocents to be protected, I would be there. A lone warrior standing against the darkness, a beacon of hope in a world besieged by fear. I climbed into my truck and turned the key, the engine roaring to life like a beast awakening from slumber. The road stretched out before me, endless and unknown. A path that would lead me to new challenges, new adventures, and new opportunities to make a difference. And so, with a grim smile on my face and a fire burning in my heart, I set out once again into the wilderness, ready to face whatever horrors the future might hold. The hunt was only just beginning.